Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This is Coaching. I am Marquise Navarro, and I'm joined today by Monica Riva, one of three hosts. Nicolette is still out taking care of that brand new baby, but the reason we're here today is we want to talk about something I think that applies to all sorts of situations, but mostly relationships, whether they're personal or professional, and that's boundaries and expectations. So,
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think so, and I think you know anybody who's in the workforce or has um, had difficult relationships in the past or currently um, needs to learn these two words: boundaries and expectations, and they're very important for a couple reasons. I know for me, when I was in the military, we had our boss would give us expectation letters. Like they actually wrote out letters of everything they expected of their people. And it was kind of all encompassing, right? The boss would write his, and then me being second in command, I would write mine, which would tailor it to his for everyone else. And it was very, it was very functional. Like it was very efficient as well because everybody knew exactly what was expected of them. And within those, the boundaries were set. All right, we will accept X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, and C.
Yeah,
So, but the same can be said for personal relationships. You know, when you meet someone, uh, whether it's a friend or future significant other, early on, you guys start setting those boundaries. Some people do, and others don't. And then you notice that when you don't set the boundaries, people start acting differently once you do, because there are certain expectations that they had, and then the reality was not the same. What are your thoughts?
yeah, it's true. Yeah, that boundaries are important. I think that probably a lot of people, entrepreneurs that start out, are not really good at setting boundaries.
Yeah,
And that can be also a problem. So boundaries have good sides and bad sides. And so yeah, and also the expectations.
right.
So
And I think you said something that brought up something in my head, and it was reality, like the realistic. The both boundaries and expectations have to be realistic when it comes to like entrepreneurs, like you said. Um, they may have unrealistic expectations,
yeah.
and it ends up just killing the entire mojo later on.
Yeah, they
And
get unrealistic expectations and perhaps even no boundaries.
yeah, and if you have expectations that can't be met, well, one, I know we had the conversation last week with Paula about self sabotage, but you know, if you keep doing it, that could be a sign that, well, now you're giving yourself an excuse as to why you can't completely get this one thing or project off the ground. Um, and we can go into a whole nother show about that. However, expectations, the thing about them, they have to be, like I said, realistic. And I'm going to I'll stick with work for right now because that the leadership piece is like something I'm very interested in and always have been. So when it comes to being in a leadership role or a supervisor, and and I really don't like using the term supervisor or manager because those to me don't describe exactly what you're supposed to be doing. The name is not, you know, in my opinion, truthful because you're not managing people. You manage processes, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't have supervision. Supervision seems like babysitting, and you shouldn't be babysitting your people. But a leader, regardless of the title, a leader is someone who knows how to work with people, get them to come together for a specific reason to accomplish a specific goal or mission, right?
Yeah, or a common purpose as well.
Exactly, a common purpose. And, it's not about forcing people to do their work, it's about making people want to do their work, right? And
Inspire.
exactly. And part of that is the expectations and the boundaries. Because when a person goes into a position, they want to know exactly what they need to do. I don't care who you are. if you go in a position, they say, just wing it. Eventually you're going to get tired of winging it when every time you do something wrong, you get, held over fire, which typically happens. So when you have clear expectations and boundaries set in a leadership position, one, your employee knows what they've got to do. I come to work, I've got to get X, Y, and Z done. And as soon as I do, I can go home or I can do a little bit more, right? It just depends on what they feel like doing that day. But clear expectations and boundaries makes for a better work environment regardless. And
Yes.
start with being realistic, and they have to be specific. You can't be very broad, because if they're broad, you give everybody room to exceed those boundaries. They're going to push the boundaries, and it overall over time it's going to wear on everybody, and then things aren't going to work functionally. What do you think?
Well, it doesn't really work. Like it's I was just thinking about my boundaries and expectations and work environment. And even I saw today, I was out walking and I saw a couple that had was walking a dog that used to be very all over the place, and it's a big dog.
Yeah.
So, and now that he's been trained to stay within the boundaries, he seems to be a much more happy dog as well. And even children, when they stay within their boundaries and they learn to stay within their boundaries and don't cry for every little thing, they seem to be more, well, happier in a way, because they know where to stay and how to behave. And that goes for the work environment as well. When you have the set boundaries, you have a better relationship with everybody around you, and it's a ripple effect that enhances your job,
Right.
enhances the work environment, enhances communication. I don't see that any negative thing about having boundaries and expectations.
Right. And it's amazing how many people don't realize that. And for instance, I had a client that I was working with, and the person had an individual kind of under them that, well, let me give myself an example as the example, because it's pretty much the same thing. All right. I had troops that when I was doing reports, right, I can't say grading them, I was reviewing them to make sure that they read, correctly, right format, all the information that we're doing for the investigation was in there, and that it didn't read like some kind of, biased rag, right? It had to be very unbiased and objective, just the facts, pretty much. And I would do this, and I would make all the corrections. I'm like, all right, it's all done, good to go. And it was a bunch, right? And over time, I realized that I kept getting the same mistakes, simple stuff. And I'm like, did these guys even look at this? So I sent it back after a while, and my boss and I had a conversation. And it turned out that basically I was giving them the opportunity to just wing it, and because they knew I would fix it. And maybe that wasn't their intention, but that's pretty much what happened. All right. The attention to detail kind of went to the wayside because they knew I was going to fix it for them.
Yeah.
And so I had to finally stop doing that. So what I would do was I would start reading, and if I hit a certain number of mistakes that resembled things I've already corrected, I would stop and send it back. I'm like, I need you to reread this, and I need you to base it off of past reports that you've done, and fix it, and then send it back. And I tell them, like, if you have an issue and you can't figure out how to word something, or you're not sure the proper format, come see me and then we'll sit down and go over it. And I realized that after I did that, the reports got better and better and better, because one, they started to realize, like, oh wow, this is a lot of mistakes, and two, they slowed down the initial review process, and I was having to review less. So, you know, once I set that expectation, that boundary, I'm not going to do this for you because this is actually your job, and realizing that one day you're going to be in my seat, now you'll have a better understanding of what goes on in this particular position.
Yeah, and they're better prepared also to take a position that is like what you were having back then, and actually do a good job of it because they read up to the expectations.
Yeah, and like I said, once I did that, life did get a lot easier, and I was like, damn man, I should have done this a lot earlier. Because I tell you what, like when you've got
But why don't people do it? Why wouldn't you have done it earlier, right? And
yeah,
that's sort of
and I didn't think about it, and then finally it dawned on me, and of course talking to my boss and getting some feedback there, and watching how he did things. He actually would do the same thing every now and then. And then we finally sat down and we kind of forced each ourselves to not do that anymore. And I think he was more the proponent of it because he was like, dude, you can't do it for him. Right. And I'm like, it's a good point. So, and it works. And I think if I think people are afraid to hurt other people's feelings or make them mad when it
yeah.
comes to setting expectations and boundaries. They don't want to be the bad guy. And if we can realize that it's not being a bad guy, it's actually helping them and us, helping ourselves, like it's better. Now if you have individuals that just can't accept the boundaries and expectations, that's not your fault unless you're giving unrealistic expectations. You can't expect somebody to pump out a 200-page report in 24 hours. I don't care who you are, right? That's not realistic at all.
No, of course there are things that are not realistic, but I mean, we have boundaries and expectations in all areas of life, and it's just a matter of fact. I mean, people need to. I mean, just need to learn to follow them, I suppose, or or take the consequences, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think if we look at that from a personal standpoint, like it all carries over, because we have the people that are pushovers, right? Those are the individuals that don't know how to set boundaries and expectations with other people. For instance, you got the people that won't hesitate to loan out money. They can't say no because they'll feel bad. They don't want the person to dislike them. And then they realize camera's doing something crazy. And then they realize that once they do say no, they've set that boundary. Like, look, I've done X, Y, and Z. I need you to try to find another way to get money. That person that they were, dealing with gets angry and stops talking to them. Right. So had they set the boundary early on, they would have been saved a headache over however long, it took them to realize it. Um, and then you also have, uh, well, partners, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case may be, you know, one does more than the other, right? Because at the beginning, it wasn't expected. Oh, you mean I don't have to put my laundry away? You ever seen
Yeah.
that meme? You ever seen that video, the magic basket? He puts dirty clothes full of dirty clothes on the counter and then it disappears and everything's magically cleaned and washed.
Yeah.
Love it. That's what that's what comes to mind every time I start, talking about expectations and boundaries. And like me and my wife went through it. Um, you know, she's likes it clean and spotless. I'm like, you know, and once we figured everything out and we came to an agreement, right? We set our own boundaries and expectations within, the confines of the family. Everything runs a lot smoother now. There's less every time I got to clean on Sunday, which I have to do today as soon as I get off of this. Um, I wake the kids up and then we'll get to vacuuming, dusting, and doing all this stuff. So, it's important to set those boundaries early, right? And then if you decide to change later, there's a discussion that needs to come, right? Just
Yeah.
like with
And you need to be able to stand up and be able to take that discussion as well, right?
exactly, it's not a argument; it's a discussion,
No.
right? And again, we could offshoot into a whole bunch of other uh,
Yeah.
shows with this kind of topic, but here, I think. one thing that I think we should discuss also is how exactly do we go about setting those boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And expectations. Like, how do we put it out there? Well, it depends on what you're talking about, of course, but you have to have the line. I absolutely cannot accept this, whatever that may be, um, and then things you're willing to compromise with, right? You have to
Yeah.
have
But
your
it
list
has,
of
it's a
things,
give and take, right? From both parts.
right? And this is mostly like mostly in the personal relationship world, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
was just thinking, but yeah, in the personal world, within the job, of course, I mean, you just have to accept the boundaries as they are because they're set and you're there to do the job
right,
usually, and it's part of the job, unless,
exactly,
as you said, it's completely unrealistic expectations.
right. And for those in the workforce, like I can speak to that because again, that's my thing. When it comes to setting expectations and boundaries, the one thing that I always did was I made sure that it coincided with one my boss's vision and mission, and then of course his vision and mission was our organizational vision and mission, right? So it was kind of a step down. It went
Yeah,
from strategic to tactical. There's the terms big picture, the little picture. How does this little picture get built into the big picture? So
yeah,
when it came down to it, I would read and study both and made sure that my expectations um, led to completing and meeting my boss's expectations for the team and individually, but mostly for the team. So that helps, right? Um, know your mission or your vision, know your mission, and then start from there. Now, there's going to be some nuances when it comes to being in a leadership position. Study what things irk you, pet peeves, right? Everybody's got those. Those also have to be realistic. Um, like for me, commas were a thing. Like I need one or two in there somewhere. Um, and I'd get so much, slack from the guys. I'm like, punctuation is very important, and stop using the same particular phrase every other sentence. So it was just something that I would not accept, and it wasn't unrealistic. It was actually very realistic to write in a way that was not monochromatic and like a robot, because that's what it looked like, a
yeah.
robot. So I would set that out, and I'd get laughed at all the time, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. And the same thing can be said for personal relationships, right?
So these boundaries and expectations, they make you grow as well as a person because you
Yes.
learn to follow the rules, and it usually is to make you grow to another level.
Yes. And I think one, you grow, and then your boundaries kind of shift, right? And your expectations change. Um, it may get easier, may get harder. Who knows? It just depends on where you're at in life, and you have to be okay with that, um, because eventually people grow, people change, and with change comes, you know, a different mindset, different expectations, and then different things you're willing to either put up with, or you're going to realize that okay, maybe that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So this particular boundary will shift. You know, and I think if you're open up to it and not scared to change, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. But
Yeah. And not to set in your own boundaries and things. Well, things have to be done like this always because that's the way it's been done, and not be able to see that you can have boundaries that shift, that will change over time. And well, yeah, just and as I said, yeah, they make you grow as well. Take children, for example. You give them an expectation or a boundary, could be just take out the trash even, or clean the kitchen, or one day, I mean, it could be something else, not just clean the table, but do something else that is bigger, a bigger chore in a way, and that has other expectations. And yeah, and you can perhaps even make dinner one day. That's also like when you grow in your boundaries and you grow in your expectations. and you grow as a person.
And it's funny because if you think about it, kids actually learn this young. They just don't realize it, I think. So, for instance, my son, he is all about money, right? He wants to earn it, he wants to have it, and hoard it, and then spend it all. But I know for a fact one of his boundaries is he's not going to want to do anything unless there's a monetary incentive.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
like for real, he's like, well, why do I have to shovel the porch? What? How much am I going to get paid? And on one hand, I'm like, well, first off, I told you to do it. Second, I'm like, smart kid. He,
Yeah.
he's like, I'll work. I have no problem working, but there needs to be an incentive. So I told him his incentive was not being grounded, but still, it was incentive. But
But on
he,
the other hand, it's a good way for him also. I mean, it's something that's good for him even in the future, right? I mean,
right,
he knows already how to set a boundary around a monetary boundary as well, which means that he probably won't be taken advantage of money wise by other people because he already has that inside of him.
exactly. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And Zoe, she's pretty much the same way. Like, she's like, I don't want to do this. She has set her boundary.
Oh, okay.
And she's very defiant, which again, on one hand, I'm like, I am the parent. You're going to listen to what I tell you. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't want to kill that,
No.
that heart. Because I mean, she's my baby girl. I need her a little bit tough, but she is learning early, and she's 9, to set. I don't like to do that, and then she'll let you know I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to be happy about it, right? Um, so I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. And the one thing I'm trying to make sure that happens is that maintains, because I think it took me a while to learn how to do that myself as a uh, what preteen, as a teenager, and then as an adult, and then eventually I'm like, oh, it's way easier if I just say like what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do, or what I'm willing to compromise with, right? Instead of just being the pushover. Not that I was
Yeah.
ever like a complete pushover, but it, if you don't voice your opinion or your concern about something that you dislike, it's just going to keep happening, right? Um,
Yes,
so
it's
yeah,
all about communication
yes,
and being willing to take it and
yes,
take that talk or take that the time to actually talk it through.
and I think that is actually great segue to the final point, and that is once you've determined your boundaries and your expectations, you have to be able to deliver, right?
Right.
And some people are very nervous about this particular part because again, it's telling people what they think they don't want to hear. And I think if we can convince individuals that at the end of the day, as long as your expectations are realistic and you're not asking them to save the world, um, what is the worst that could happen? They're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, but you're setting your boundaries and your expectations. It's either they accept it or they don't. Now, when it comes to personal relationships, if they don't accept it, in my opinion, you're probably going to be better off
Yeah.
because they're most likely not going to talk to you anymore. You just identified the person that's not really your friend. True friends and family will understand. Um, now, doesn't mean that there's no compromise, right? Because once you've given yours, you should be able to receive theirs. So if I give you a list of my expectations and my boundaries, and I'm like, what do you agree or disagree with? That's when the discussion starts, not an
Right.
argument, right? So if we can get past the I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings piece and understand that their reaction to your boundaries and expectations is not your fault, um, it's a personal thing. I think the conversation will be had more often.
Yeah, and it's not that, well, my boundaries, of course, they are perhaps set at a certain angle, for example, but if I talk about it, let's say we were talking about it, you had yours, I had mine, we will come to a compromise that will work for both of us.
Right. Exactly. And it's because it is give and take a lot
But
of,
yeah, you need to be willing to take the conversation,
right.
and perhaps
Not,
even more than once.
right. And not get, for lack of a better term, butt hurt if you hear something you don't like. Um, because again, when it comes to all of that, you're you can't expect the person to just do everything you want
No,
and
of course not.
then, just not do anything that they want with anything. And again, unless you're in a leadership position. If you're in a leadership position as a professional, there are boundaries and there are rules and regulations set in place by that particular organization. Now, if the person can't abide by your expectations and boundaries based off of organizational mission and vision, and then section mission and vision, then it's time to have the conversation of, I think it's, maybe you're not meant for this particular position. Um, so that's, and we could probably talk about firing people later, but let's not do that. We're
No,
talking
let's
about,
keep them for now.
yeah, we're talking about, expectations and boundaries. And there's some people that are just going to get it and some people that don't. Um, but that is one of the things that is very important in any kind of relationship because it can't be one sided, you know.
No.
And if you feel it's one sided for too long and the other person doesn't understand, it's just going to blow up later. So, yeah.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you can't take it any longer. And well, I remember, I mean, I was married for 18 years and thought I had a really good marriage, but at a certain point I woke up and I realized that I was doing all the work and I was doing everything and it just couldn't go on like that.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I started setting my expectations and it didn't land that well.
mm,
So yeah, and I mean you just have to, yeah, then well, I mean stick to your heart and what you really believe is good for you, and then of course talk it out with the other person, and that goes for jobs as well. If there's something where I work that I don't really agree with, I will be able to take the conversation with my boss and see if we can come to a compromise or if he can help me understand why it has to be that way.
yes. And that was a big thing about, well, I had pretty much the same two things, right? Relationship wise, my wife did a lot. And then one day she's like, look, I need help. I'm like, oh, my bad. I thought we were good. And
Yeah.
yeah, but when she told me that, I'm like, and I was actually, I'm like, I was mad. I'm like, why didn't you say something earlier? I would have helped. Instead of, being the asshole sitting over here, like, doing great, babe, and, but once she laid it out and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Not a problem, and now everything's, I mean, nothing's ever perfect, right? But we do have a way better communication relationship now, you know. And then as far as work goes, yeah, um, professionally, knowing what I needed to do and being, unambiguous about it, or my boss being very clear about expectations and boundaries, it makes it a lot easier, stress free, you know, and then
Yeah.
understanding that when people didn't understand my expectations completely, I tell them like if there's something I'm missing, you have to let me know, and we'll have a discussion about it. And I would send that to my bosses as well, like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Please help me understand. And it, yeah, it made it way, it just makes it way easier. Now, when they didn't want to explain things, it made it harder. Um, which is why I always explain things when I can. I try to be as clear as possible, not do as I say, right?
Yeah, not because I told you so. I mean, you have to do it because I tell you to.
Even though,
There's a reason.
yeah, even though I was in the military and I was in charge and I could say that, doesn't mean I should say that. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. Um, even like, let's put it this way, even like the hardcore Army and Marine folks, right? They do have their moments at the lower ranks, right? And they're telling people what to do because I said to do it. As they get higher in rank, they understand that they can't just push around certain ranks. They're like, all right, this individual deserves to know what's going on. And even, they have the model, let your people do their job with everything possible, that you can give them to include information. So even the hardcore, military folks, they know that that's not the right model to do as I say, at a certain rank level, of course. But yeah, no, I think this was a
I
good
suppose, I
topic.
mean, some people love that to start. I mean, take that as a, do as I say, it's because they feel that they have more power by doing it that way.
Yeah,
It feels like they're in charge of everything.
no,
So they probably feel stronger, but do you want to feel stronger in the short term, or would you like to create something that works for the long term?
yeah. Or even worse, and is kind of presumptuous to people. I'm not going to explain it because I don't think you'll understand it. Like,
Yeah, no.
yeah, I've felt that way, and after I look back on the situations, I understood that that was probably not the right thing because younger ranks are smarter than we give them credit for, and they can be very innovative and full of ideas if we give them the opportunity. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But again, that's a topic for another podcast. So, no, I think this was a pretty good discussion. Hopefully, everybody walks away knowing that one, boundaries and expectations are important throughout life, regardless of the relationship, professional, personal. It's important to set those early and then revisit them often to figure out if things have changed. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it works for everyone, even for people that have dogs. Or I don't think you can tell your cat what to do, but
Yeah, there's always an exception to the rule.
but everybody feels better. Children feel better when they know what's expected and the boundaries.
Yeah,
As long as you're clear and you talk about it, and in the workforce, you feel better when you know what's expected of you, and how to actually work up to that expectation.
yep.
And so yeah, um, no boundaries. I don't know if that would work. I mean, no boundaries, no expectations. What do you do then? I mean,
Eesh. I think it depends on the relationship and what you're doing. There are folks that have zero F's when it comes to certain things, but
but
I
still
still
with
think,
yourself, you
yeah, I
need to
still
have
think,
boundaries as well. You need to go to sleep at a certain time of the night, for
right.
example. You have to eat a certain, probably not at a certain hour, but
Yeah,
a certain amount during the day. There have to be some kind of boundaries in all areas.
exactly. And I think folks that don't have boundaries, they're probably they've got to be okay with it, living their
But
best life.
if somebody out there doesn't have see any boundaries, or feel that they are living a life that isn't what they really like, perhaps if they look around and look at themselves and check up, is there a boundary that I can set here to make my life better? Something that I can work towards.
Yeah, I think yes. So I think that goes along the lines of sitting down and finding structure for yourself,
Yeah.
and make sure again, reiterate, has to be very specific, very clear. It can't be ambiguous at all, and it needs to be realistic. Setting unrealistic expectations and boundaries for yourself or anyone else is just a recipe, for trouble. So yeah, no, I think this was a good topic, and I will say end it here with, if anybody that's listening or watching, depending on which platform you're on, if you guys want to get in contact with us or have any questions, you can email us at thisiscoachingshow@gmail.com. All the information that you provide us or questions will be confidential unless you say we can share it specifically. Now, if it's a topic that we can talk to on the show, we will. We just won't mention any names. Now, there's also the option to come on and get some coaching uh, on
Yeah,
the
I
show.
really would enjoy that. Have somebody come on and get some coaching.
Definitely. And because we have a pool of great coaches, I think we could definitely set something up to very specific to the person, depending on, what they're asking. But yeah, for now, Marquise Navarro, I'm with the lovely Monica Riva.
Oh, thank
And
you.
thanks everybody for coming by. And until then, see y'all later.
Yeah, have a great week.